We're going to begin our deliberations today. It's a pleasure to welcome you to the second day of the Climate Resilience and Local Government Policy Conference, Lessons from Los Angeles and Tel Aviv. I want to just start by thanking everybody for what was really, I think, a very, very interesting and valuable, rich discussions and lectures yesterday. Today, I expect no less. To kick us off, I want to introduce the moderator of our first panel about environmental justice. Rodolfo Dirzo, besides being a personal friend, is really one of the world's leading ecologists, has written some of the most important recent literature on extinctions. His research, field research, takes place both in California and Latin America. But in this context, he took on the role as overseeing the issue of climate justice in the Doerr School for the Sustainability, and it is really a terrific honor to have him to oversee this panel. Rodolfo, please, you have the floor.
Good morning, everyone. I want to welcome you all to Stanford, if you're not from this area, or to California, if you're coming from other parts of the country, or from other parts of the planet. So welcome to Stanford. It is my pleasure to be with you this morning to moderate this panel. And let me just preface our conversation this morning by a couple of comments related to environmental justice. The Nobel laureate, Paul Crutzen, you might recognize the name, Paul Crutzen. He was famous because of his work about the CFCs and the thinning of the ozone layer. And this fantastic scientist and professor in the year 2002 published a paper that publicized and brought to the people's attention the idea of the Anthropocene, because he was very much concerned that the typical geological era that we live at, the Holocene, actually should be changed in name and recognition to address and recognize the point that the impact of humanity on the planet is quite significant at this moment. And so the idea of the Anthropocene has actually penetrated in certainly the scientific community and in society at large, I would say, as well. Now, the Anthropocene has multiple manifestations to it, one of them being, of course, climate change. Perhaps the global environmental change that has the most visibility, the sexiest global environmental change, so to speak, is climate change. But of course, that is not the only global environmental change. But climate change certainly is a very tricky and challenging phenomenon that is occurring globally. In my area of expertise, we tend to think about the impact of climate change in the context of disparity, in the context of disproportionality, global north and global south. So you might have seen lots and lots of papers talking about how biodiversity is going to be impacted by global change, impacted particularly the areas where we still have good remainings of biological diversity. And of course, climate change has another issue, which is climate justice, right? That disproportionality in the impact of climate change, with some communities contributing the least to climate change, at the same time being impacted the most. But that's in a global context. But the reality is that we see this heterogeneity in cultural, demographic infrastructures, perspectives, socioeconomic conditions within cities as well. And therefore, this panel today is going to address this question of environmental justice and from the point of view of climate justice. One of the key elements in this situation of climate justice within urban settings, within urban ecosystems, is the identification and ideally protection of vulnerable populations in urban environments. How do we approach that? How do we do that? Well, luckily, we have a fantastic panel today to address these questions in a comparative analysis, and I don't mean statistical comparison between Tel Aviv and Los Angeles or cities in Israel and in the US, but I really mean a comparison or a perspective, an analysis of the similarities, differences, the lessons learned, the frameworks and so on that we could derive from paying attention to these very contrasting, vibrant, but at the same time similar cities in the sense of the disparities of the impacts of climate change. And so we'll have a terrific panel today to address these questions, including two speakers and two panelists or two respondents. The speakers are going to be Professor Noga Kronfeld-Schor from Israel. Shall we invite her to come up here, please? I am so happy to tell you guys that Noga is an amazing ecologist, and that's so close to my heart because I am an ecologist as well. And she does questions about biodiversity and sustainability from the point of view of the interactions between humans and wildlife. That's fantastic. Noga, welcome. Thank you so much. And obviously she's going to tell us about Tel-Aviv. And then the next panelist is going to be Matthew Gonser. He is the climate resilience officer in the county of Los Angeles. And Matt has been doing some amazing work and has been doing some fantastic elements of combining the metrics, understanding of vulnerability, and so on, and the human dimensions of that aspect as well. So we're delighted to have Matthew Gonser coming to our panel today as well. So Matthew, welcome. Where are you, Matthew? Matt. Very fantastic. And then after that, they will speak for about 20 minutes each. That's kind of the mechanics that we have planned. And then we will have the two panelists, the two respondents, and they're going to be Mark Buntaine, and then we're going to have also Dr. Meital Peleg-Mizrachi. And so our two speakers are going to go first, and then I will call the panelists to come up and respond and comment about them, about their conversations, about the presentations. But then after that, we're going to invite you to have a conversation with the panelists as well and have Q&A and see what we can derive from this fantastic gathering this morning. So without further ado, thank you so much, Noga, and you ready to go.
Thank you. This is not my presentation. So I'm going to tell you about a project I initiated as the chief scientist of the Ministry for Environmental Protection. Since I started this project, I returned to Tel-Aviv University. I'm a professor of zoology at Tel-Aviv University, and I'm now chairing the new School for Environmental Studies at Tel-Aviv University, and I'm also the chair of the National Council for Research and Development. And since this project was very dear to me, I decided to voluntarily keep leading it for the government, so I'm still leading this project. And the project actually, I started thinking about it when I joined the different committees at the government that were preparing adaptation plans to climate change. And my goal was to make sure that the decisions are based on knowledge and science. And I realized that this is a very unrealistic task for decision makers. Not only for decision makers, actually one person can't have all the information and understand all the different fields that you need to understand in order to make knowledge-based decisions. And I started exploring the option to develop a system that will support decision makers for a more resilient future. Okay, so I don't think I have to explain to you that when we look at climate risks, it's overwhelming. When you tell a mayor, please prepare an action plan for climate resilience, it's really difficult to know where to start. And the reason is that the climate change risks are actually have several dimensions, including the hazard, the probability to be experiencing a certain intensity of the hazard and the frequency of the hazard, the exposure, who and or what will be exposed to this hazard, and the vulnerability or sensitivity, what is the susceptibility of the to damage of the exposed population or infrastructure or whatever is exposed. And even though we have solutions to many of these risks, it is really difficult to know, to prioritize what we need to do and where and when, what is more important, where the risk is higher. And there, as a result, as the UN puts it, we're doing too little and too slow. So this is what I came, this is what I was trying to solve. And I think that one of the problems is that we need high resolution information about the impacts that are distributed unequally, both in space and in time. So what the risk is right here when we're standing could be completely different, even 100 meters away from here. And we need to know what to expect and where. So doesn't respond. So our aim when we started this project was to optimize climate change adaptation decision making across all sectors. We are focusing on local authorities and the governmental bodies. And the idea is that if we if we collect the information, analyze it, and supply the decision makers with accurate and accessible and understandable knowledge in a very high spatial resolution, they will be able to make a better decision based on knowledge. And we decided to develop indices for vulnerability, and the vulnerability or the risk equals the exposure plus sensitivity and minus adaptive capacity. And what the product we wanted to develop was a high resolution vulnerability maps, including IPCC scenarios. So this is basically what we envisioned. This is Kiryat Gat, one of the cities in Israel. And what you see is vulnerability for flooding. So if the mayor or the city engineer looks at this map, he can press on the red area, which is high vulnerability, and get the information. What is the source of this high vulnerability? Is this the exposure, the sensitivity, or the adaptive capacity? And from that, get a response toolkit that offers him solutions that he can use, and from that he can prepare an action plan. And the response toolkit should include information such as relevant governmental decisions, information sources, how we calculated these indices, funding opportunities, and more. So to start, this is a huge project, and to start it, we collaborated with the Israeli Society for Ecology and Environmental Sciences. We conducted an expert committee with more than 100 scientists and professionals, and what we asked them was, what are the parameters that we need to map? And they came up, it's by the way, it's available online in Hebrew and in English, and they came up with 128 parameters that were divided into 4 groups: socioeconomic sensitivities, operational continuities, health sensitivity, and environmental sensitivity. But if you look at the parameters, it doesn't tell us what to map. So social sensitivity, what do we need to map? What exposure, what vulnerability, or it's a lot of work to start working from this point. So we needed a bigger and better group, and we approached the Israeli Academy of Sciences and Humanities, and they agreed to join the project. And together with the academy, we formed a steering committee chaired by Professor Ran Feitelson from the Hebrew University. And we have steering committee members. Two of them are here. Alon Tal is a member, and David Perlmutter is also a member over there. And we had a lot of discussions at the academy, starting to just to think how to manage this process, because it's a huge process. I'm happy to say that dozens of, I think that we are almost at 200 professors and professionals that joined different teams in this process. And just to show you a few steps of the process. So first I'm sorry, some of the slides are in Hebrew, but I translated the main things because it's too much work to translate it. I don't have the time. So just defining the process, we started with defining local impacts and policy areas that are involved and that we should map. And then we prepared this metrics, looking at the different exposure and sensitivity parameters, and we started working on each. The first thing we decided upon was what are the criteria for choosing the indicators for all groups, because there were many groups working on this project. And eventually we came up with 6 criteria that were distributed between all groups. The relevance and importance in the context of vulnerability. We must have the data available or soon to be available, because we can have a really good idea, but we don't have spatial data. And if you don't have spatial data, it doesn't help us. Identifiable and available threshold values, and this is very specific and very professional. So we had to consult with many different disciplines. Uniqueness, that's also an issue, because if you add parameters that are correlated, you increase the data and it doesn't give you much information. So minimum correlation with other indicators. We also looked for parameters that can be dealt with effectively. Otherwise, there's no reason to map them. And we realized we are going to talk about thousands of parameters. So we asked each group to choose the minimum number of most important indicators and to rank them. So we started with mapping the exposure parameters. Most of these parameters we get from the Israeli Meteorological Services. We asked them for these maps of these specific parameters. Some of them demanded more research, and we are working in collaboration with researchers that give us more detailed information, for example, on urban heat islands, because the Meteorological Services give us a pixel of 3 by 3 kilometers. For some of the information, that's not good enough. This is a work in progress. So during the work, we realized we didn't have a group working on wind, and we didn't have a group working on fires. So this is still, we have these committees now. And I'm happy to share the presentation. So Alon, if you want to put it on the website or something. So these are the parameters we are working with now. So for example, for sea level rise, we didn't have data. So the National Research Center for Seas and Lakes is now producing the data for us. We're trying to use governmental data sources as much as possible, because otherwise we take the responsibility for the data, and that might be problematic. So after we mapped the risks, we formed the 4 working groups, and each of them had subdivisions. So we had a group, for example, on society and health, and they divided into 2 groups, but then merged their findings, and we have when we put this in our website, we look at society and health together. Open spaces and biodiversity, they decided they want a group that specialize on fires, but they also divided into, I'll show it later, divided into several groups. Infrastructures that decided that even though the division in infrastructures was on infrastructure based, so electricity, ports, and so on, they decided that coastal area needs to be dealt with separately because it faces different risks, and we have a group working on coastal area. Economy just had their first meeting because they have to get the data from all other groups and then translate it into cost and benefits of action plans. Wrong side. Okay, so this is just to show the work process. Each group has a group leader or two group leaders, and they decide how to work. So society and health had several roundtables, but open spaces had a lot of subgroups that met separately. But it keeps growing, so more and more people are joining to the subgroups and contributing to the process. And just to show you an example, the health and society group is the most advanced now. So they mapped these parameters for exposure, sensitivity, and adaptation. The ones that are labeled with darker pink are the ones that they ranked higher. So urban heat islands, heat load, and extreme heat load, for example, and exposure to direct radiation in the public domain. But still, these are not parameters that we can map. So if we take these and we ask them, so now give us what are the specific parameters that we can map spatially, and they came up with several parameters. One of them is age. And they ranked age 70 and over as extreme sensitivity, 65 to 70 as high sensitivity, and 0 to 5 as high sensitivity too. And they also recommended using the socioeconomic level index that is calculated by the Central Bureau of Statistics in Israel. 1 is low socioeconomic level and 10 is high socioeconomic level. So these are the parameters that we took. We have some principles of operation and service capabilities that we are demanding, that we want the portal to have. We decided that we are using good enough data. We're not waiting for perfect data because we don't have time to waste. We better have some source of information when we make decisions, even though the level of uncertainty might be relatively high, and it will improve with time. Everything will be open source. Some of the information will be at high resolution and some at lower resolution, depending on the sensitivity of the information. It will be constantly improved and updated. There will be dashboards and a possibility for queries. There will be a variety of processing and integrating tools. It will be up to date, which will also allow us to evaluate actions that are being made over the years to see if the sensitivity or vulnerability decreased, and it will have a computer-to-computer access. So scientists and local municipalities or whoever is interested or entrepreneurs could use this information to advance their actions. And just to show you how, okay. So currently it's a MOOC, it's not active, but it's sorry, it's in Hebrew, but it's going to be in English and in Arabic. So surrounding countries could use and learn about the process. So first, you can see on the right the risks. And if we choose heat, for example, you have a window that opens, and then you have to choose what is the hazard that you want to measure, if it's health or infrastructure or whatever. And when you choose this, you see I chose health, and you get several different indices. The first one is the one that was developed by the Academy for Arts and Sciences, but there are others that were developed by scientists that you can choose to look at them too and see if there are differences. And then there's a window that shows you what was calculated, how it was calculated, and gives a link to what you can do about it, and so on. And then when you finish choosing all the parameters, this window opens, and this shows you by neighborhoods what the vulnerability is. You can choose if you want current, so green is low and red is high. You can choose if you want to look at current state or future scenarios. And when you choose future scenarios, you can choose medium or high risk, like 4.5 and 8.5. And then you can choose the year in this slider. And now I'm switching from the MOOC to actual data on GIS. So just to show you that we already have some really interesting results. So this is elderly people and socioeconomic level combined. And we already have some really surprising results. For example, if you see the, if you see the red city near the seashore about in the middle, this is Bat Yam. And Bat Yam has a large population of Russians that came from the Soviet Union in the late 80s and during the 90s. Normally, they were white collar workers in Russia, but they don't speak the language, so they're educated, but they were put in neighborhoods and didn't mix with the population. So most of the elderly people that didn't go to school in Israel don't speak Hebrew. They have their own shops that with food that they import. So it's like a separated population. And their socioeconomic level is low. So there are cities with neighborhoods like this that are, at least I didn't think of them as vulnerable, because they're high educated people, but they come very clearly as old populations. They don't have like, normally some of them don't have kids at all. Some of them have one kid that can't help them. So this is a population that we have to take care of, and we didn't think of them. We were thinking that the Orthodox Jews neighborhoods will be the most vulnerable, and they are not. When we look at elderly people, I also marked with a purple line the Orthodox cities and neighborhoods. And you can see, אני יכולה לעשות פה, יש פה pointer? I just don't want to turn it off. I don't know. No, I don't think so. Yeah, do you see? Okay, so here, for example, you see a very large Orthodox neighborhood, and it's not as red as we would expect. This is one of the neighborhoods that we were expecting to get the most vulnerability. But when you look at children, age 0 to 5, then you see that neighborhood, that Orthodox neighborhood, is suddenly very high vulnerability, while Bat Yam, which was red before, is now at a low vulnerability level. So it means that the actions that we should take in each of these neighborhoods is completely different. So in Bat Yam, we have to protect the elderly from heat, But in Bnei Brak, we have to protect the children from heat. So that it's a completely different action that we need to take, even though we are looking at the same exposure. So the first version of this portal is going to be launched by the end of the year. It will have, I can't say now how many layers we will have when it will be launched, but we already have enough layers to start working with it, and we don't want to keep the information from decision makers. We think that once we have information that you can work with, we have to expose it and let them work with it. And I just want to thank all everyone that helps us. Most of them are volunteering. Like most of these bodies don't get money for this project. They just joined it and they contribute to it. And I'm very, very thankful for all of them. And I hope it will be successful. And if you want any information about this project and use the information that we collected, we're happy to share. We're trying to publish everything in English, Arabic, and Hebrew. So it will be available to everyone. And thank you. Okay.
Thank you so much, Noga. That was an amazing presentation. The granularity that you guys brought into the analysis of the situation there is just fantastic. Now we'll hear about a city in the US, an important city and county. So Matthew Gonser, who is the Climate Resilience Officer of the County of Los Angeles, is going to tell us about his mega city.
Boker Tov, buenos dias, good morning, everybody. As mentioned, my name is Matthew Gonser. I serve as the Climate Resilience Officer for the County of Los Angeles. And this certainly builds on a lot of the great information shared by some of my City of Los Angeles colleagues yesterday, as well as some parallels and convergence with the funding and financing panel on the East Wing yesterday afternoon. But I wanted to start off by reflecting, as a former University of Hawaii employee some time ago, it's always wonderful to be on campuses and to sort of like feel the spirit and the willingness to engage in learning and exchange. And also I had an opportunity to explore campus a little bit and be uplifted and also humbled by some of the beautiful Rodin sculptures, Gates of Hell, Prayer. There's another one called, not a Rodin, and it's a copy, the Angel of Grief, further along the way. And that reminded me of some of the discussion we had yesterday around the urgency of this topic. And you may be familiar with physicist John Holdren, who's a former US science advisor. He said, we basically have three choices with respect to climate change: mitigation, adaptation, and suffering. We're gonna do a little bit of all of it. And it's kind of up to us how much of a mix each of those components will have. So with that, I hope to share a little bit about what is the County of Los Angeles Chief Sustainability Office. Very much aligned with the previous speaker, share the process that we went through for developing and working with our countywide climate vulnerability assessment, and then move from maps to people and share a specific project that we're working on to hopefully translate and use the information in practical settings. So the County of Los Angeles is a relatively youngish government institution. It was established in 2016 via a board motion. Very high level, we are a critical policy coordinating entity. At 10 people, we are about 0.01% of the county's entire workforce, but we are growing and evolving and becoming much more interested in not just setting the foundational policy approaches, but really bringing the resources to bear and holding our feet to the fire on the implementation of these high-level goals and aspirations. The work was really started, or at least the work plan for the team and the office was established in 2019 after several years of deep and direct engagement with subject matter experts, as many local governments as we could engage, as many residents as we could engage at the time. And we do have this overarching Our County Sustainability Plan. It has 12 high-level goals that really set the vision for an integrated, prosperous, thriving, connected community. But we're in the process of updating that plan. And upon reflection and looking at our annual assessments of progress of the strategies and actions within that plan, we realize there are certain things that need to be enhanced in this update process, elevated and more explicitly worked on as we progress into the next iteration of the plan. And that does include environmental justice, climate resilience, and more around circular and green economies. And we know these are not unrelated, siloed things. They need to be connected and coordinated. So you won't really see a new goal that explicitly states any of these things because it needs to be woven in and throughout all of the work moving forward. And one of the actions within the original Our County plan said, create a climate vulnerability assessment. So we're pleased that that is one of those several actions that we were able to check off as we progressed. Here's a snapshot of some of the kinds of images and graphics, very similar to what we just saw in the first presentation, really looking at what we know around the projections on the various climate hazards. What does that mean for people in place, the environment of those places, and the infrastructure that is meant to support thriving communities and thriving economies at the regional scale. But the whole of the county enterprise hasn't been sitting and waiting for the next update of the Our County Sustainability Plan. They certainly weren't waiting for me to join the team just September of last year. We do have other sort of statutory requirements or other truths and realities that we're just confronted with, that those departments that have sort of asset management responsibilities or operational responsibilities knew they needed to embark on their own kinds of efforts, including things like a regional county water plan. We heard some great information around where we do get our water in the region generally yesterday. We have a climate action plan just for our jurisdiction. Looking across the coastline, there are between, I think it's around 9 different coastal communities and jurisdictions, but the county itself operates and maintains the beaches, even across some of those city jurisdictions. There have been other initiatives and offices that have been created since the work was done, including an Office of Environmental Justice and Climate Health within our Department of Health, an anti-racism and diversity initiative within the Chief Executive Office. So leave it to say, there is already a lot of great leadership work, but it's a lot to try to communicate, align the resources, and stay focused on any of the priorities moving forward. And that's what we're really excited about through this update process and to continue to work with jurisdictions across the county. But what and who is Los Angeles? We heard from our colleagues from City of LA. It's difficult to see on this map, but they are both the largest geographic city in the county and also the most populous city in the county. But the county itself is a vast expanse of territory that includes 88 incorporated cities and a vast landscape of unincorporated, non-contiguous county areas. The county of LA is more than the population of Israel. If you take about 2 LA counties, you have the size of Israel. For every 34 people in the United States, 1 of them lives in LA County, and 1 out of every 4 individuals within the state of California lives within LA County. But again, LA City is the largest. There are about 4 million people, so 40% of the county's population. The next largest segment is 1 million people in all of those disparate yellow communities, which are unincorporated LA County, where we have direct permitting responsibilities, direct service provision responsibilities. And then you see this wild experiment of democracy, which is all those other lines spread throughout the county, which include 87 other incorporated cities, some of which have resources, some of which are teeny tiny. And we have different relationships to ensure that we're all working on these regional visions around sustainability and climate resilience together. But it's not just these imaginary boundaries of jurisdictional lines. There are real and challenging geographical and topographic issues that manifest in some of the climate hazards and the challenges in providing services to community all across the county. So with that, I'll just share a little bit more information on what is included within the county's climate vulnerability assessment. I will say, I think we heard just yesterday, LA City recently completed their own finer grained city climate vulnerability assessment, and that's great and right. We saw an example of national tools. We have this county resource. Those that need to or want to can certainly take that effort, but it's unrealistic actually that most of our other cities, partly because of their geography or their means and resources, would embark on a similar mapping exercise. So that is a role that we play at the county level government to provide that technical resource, provide that kind of template and foundation to help them think through around their policies, providing services to community, and hopefully pursuing funding opportunities. The state actually has a definition for environmental justice, the fair treatment of people of all races, cultures, and incomes with respect to the development, adoption, implementation, and enforcement of environmental laws, regulations, and policies. We heard from the CAL FIRE agency yesterday, this relationship between hazards and general plans and what that means for incorporating known information into our planning policies and practices. The details are unimportant in terms of these specific state statutes, but it's meant to leave you with the state of California is best when it sets a high bar in terms of what communities across the state needs to do, and then it helps provide resources to lift all boats towards reaching those goals and aspirations. Several of those laws required development of vulnerability assessments to include within these municipal general plans, and a component of those called the safety element, which is a lot of where the hazards live. And we hope that the resource that we've developed can further aid those smaller jurisdictions that similarly need to do this within their own planning documents. We saw the great methodology and framework for what it means to do a climate vulnerability assessment, certainly looking first and foremost around the projections and the science and data, both in the near, mid, and long term around the climate hazards, thinking about those elements that might create vulnerabilities for different people in different places. What are those physical assets and those infrastructures that are at risk as a result of these climate hazards? And then the overly complicated and challenging reality of sometimes when something breaks over here, that means it's going to affect something over here, and you can have cascading kinds of impacts. So you're not always just solving for one issue. You have to think about those second and third order challenges of the electrical grid, the water system, the street network, et cetera. So again, this is information that this audience is quite familiar with. The key hazards that we were looking at and the projection, that global modeling around what we do or don't do around emissions and what that means for any of the changes in these environmental systems. Those are the inputs that we then embarked upon looking at the climate hazards, the social impacts, the physical concerns, and the cascading impacts. So within the scope of the CVA, the Climate Vulnerability Assessment, again, it's both the people things, but also the physical things, those different components that might present a situation where someone is more vulnerable than another. And then what are those physical bits of infrastructure and the assets that we know we need to continue to invest in, maintain, and adapt over time so that they can continue to support community for the things that we know are on the horizon in the coming decades. The theory and the method is pretty clear in terms of exposure and sensitivity, but I'll share that it is not as simple to measure and quantify this notion of adaptive capacity. Sometimes it can be how good is a physical asset in terms of reducing risk, but as we heard from Noga before, there are a lot of other things that are just not as easily measured in terms of social connections, community cohesion, those kinds of interpersonal resiliencies that can really help us overcome some of the concepts of physical or climate risk, both in preparing and responding to any particular hazard over time. And also, it's really important to not say someone is a vulnerable person per se. We can sort of abstract the concept of social vulnerability, but it's not inherently about any individual or household's weakness or incapacity to be aware of some of these challenges. It certainly is an inequity in terms of the resources that might be available for any particular household, or the historical injustices that we're trying to overcome in terms of bringing those resources to those who need it most first. And that is baked in, and it's just important that we're not offensive to people when we're talking about these very heady topics, and that we can also empower with information and resources and hopefully new partnerships to address these social vulnerabilities and these environmental and climate justice needs moving forward. So again, this is what we know, and the arrows are again abstract, but it's important to think through these different hazards. We think about climate impacts or hazard events as potentially either shocks or stresses. A shock is kind of a punch to the gut. It's an event-based activity where hopefully over time we recover better than we were before, and we think about the systems that are necessary to mitigate the impact of any future potential event. And that's really like a flood event, a wildfire event, even an extreme heat event. But I like to look at the temperature gauge and the ocean level gauge, and you can see that clear up arrow. That's because those are stresses. Those are just changing baselines in how hot it is outside, what's the level of the water, and we are clearer in terms of the projection and the trajectory into the mid-century and beyond than we are in terms of the likelihood of any weather event actually happening. It doesn't mean it's less consequential. It just, on the measurement of risk being a combination of likelihood and consequence, we just know where the temperature is going because of our action or inaction around climate pollution. We know the trajectory of the ocean and the contributions that are driving sea level rise. And it's important to think about the both and, just in the same way that Noga highlighted in working with people. We need to understand the different risks and the services and support that might be warranted to address those vulnerabilities. If you're interested, once you get this presentation, those two bubbles are links to both the static written report, which at this point is now 4 years old, but it has really important and helpful background information, awareness on the methodology, and some profiles of different communities. But it's the mapping tool that's of great interest, and we hope people can explore and utilize. And it's the data around some of the social variables that gets updated quite frequently when new information becomes available. So that's a great thing to balance the static report itself. And this is not something that I want to spend any time on, but it's just a reminder and a recognition of the interconnectedness of our infrastructure, that community cohesion. There are members of different kinds and different tiers of community, even within this room. This notion of community isn't always necessarily the houses on your street, the city that you live in. It's the ties that bind us across all of these things. And that's true for the physical infrastructure as well. And lastly, we're trying to continue to extend this information, especially with the smaller jurisdictions, to help them think through how it can be a resource for them to pursue grants, to support their municipal operations, their long-range planning, their infrastructure planning. And it's a tool and a resource that we are using as we're directly engaging community moving forward. And that's what I hope to leave here as I wrap up right now, is to really talk about the need to move from maps and data and to directly engage people in the information. We have an exciting pilot effort right now that is supported and only possible because of a grant that we received from the state. We had a colleague here yesterday from the Governor's Office of Land Use and Climate Innovation this Integrated Climate Adaptation and Resilience Program is a funding program within that office. For us, we wanted to, in recognition that the county is quite geographically and demographically diverse, and that county pockets of responsibility are spread all throughout and not inherently contiguous, we just don't have the ability to have direct relationships and connection with people all across the county. So through this grant program, we're really hoping to work with fairly institutional and regional nonprofits who then can work with more hyper-local community nonprofits to increase their capacity to help extend the kind of information, but then also be a two-way street to give us the kind of inputs that we need for infrastructure operations, maintenance, and projects. And where did we start? We started with a mapping exercise because that is really helpful and important data, but maps are not the answer. They're really helpful for getting us to a starting point to then ask questions, just like Noga said, oh, that really challenged my assumption around XYZ. What does that then mean? How do I have a subsequent discussion with somebody? So for us, we thought we were just going to look at the hazards, look at the county incorporated areas, and think through what's the best opportunity for a partnership to enhance the capacity locally. And it really was one of our community nonprofits, or sorry, our institutional regional nonprofits, Climate Resolve, who we will hear from later this afternoon, who helped us understand an effort or initiative that they had working with a specific population in an unincorporated county, and said, I hear you of what the data is telling me, but we think the opportunity for the work that you're trying to do and that we're trying to do to build our partnerships and relationships makes more sense over here. And that's okay. It's okay to deviate from what the data is telling you, so long as there's rationale and agreement around the why. So for us, we have three core objectives with this project. As I mentioned, it's expanding our partnerships with these more institutional regional nonprofits who then can help build new relationships with these specific on-the-ground community-based organizations. Sometimes they're not even formal 501c3s. One of them is a church group, one of them is some senoras in another community. And that's really helpful for us too, because that kind of capacity is just as valuable as someone that has all the paperwork and ducks in a row to get a grant. They're doing real social connectivity, community resilience, community cohesion. So through those, another point is that most of these on the ground community organizations, sustainability and climate work is not their bread and butter. That's not why they existed, but they also recognize the challenges that people have right outside their door and the connection to some of these direct climate impacts and the concern for their increased impacts moving forward. So they're really leaning into, yes, that's not why we came into being, but this is related and aligned with our community work, and we want to be partners in it. So the second core objective is that we have all of this great data. We know where our infrastructure is. We know where it's not working perhaps, but the lived experience is just as important. And we wanted to create templates and methods and help explain how, someone's challenges around getting to a bus stop, getting to a grocery store are connected to what we hope to overcome in terms of addressing infrastructure inequities and advancing climate resilience. And then lastly, sort of weave that all together into hopefully co-created project concepts and the solutions for the things that are challenging them today and that we know will also address some of those future risks. So very quickly, the kinds of projects that are surfacing do include things that are just broken, right? Flooding is not always because the weather events are more extreme. Sometimes it's because our stuff is broke and we need to fix it. And we don't always know that unless someone tells us, and having that direct relationship goes a long way into helping us prioritize and to get other project champions to drive the resources to those solutions. But on the your right-hand side, it's also an opportunity to help people see and understand that these are networks of assets and resources, and why it might be more important sometimes to do something that's outside of where they thought the problem area was, because we have that information. We understand the connections and the linkages, and we can help explain why it's important to do perhaps A first over 2 down there. And this is a unique experiment, as I mentioned. Though I didn't share, there is this larger regional initiative called Infrastructure for LA. If you go to the website, it reads very much like, oh, there was all this federal money, so let's make sure we come together to get our ducks in a row, and we'll be the most competitive, and we'll bring all the money to LA County. We were doing quite good at that, even though some of our federal grants have since been yanked, unfortunately. But the relationships are still there, and we know that it's important to do this kind of coordination regardless of the funding opportunity, so that we are prepared to advocate for what we know is priority when money is available, or to advocate for potentially new local generated revenues to deliver this important work. So that's us, LA County Sustainability Office at the top left, those 4 nonprofits down below, LA Neighborhood Land Trust, Climate Resolve, Pacoima Beautiful, and the Conservation Corps of Long Beach. Those are our institutional partners that are also part of this Infrastructure Justice for LA coalition. And it's them that are helping extend our reach, our information, and to be that conduit and two-way street directly with some of those on-the-ground nonprofits. The specifics and details on this very graphically intense image are not important. I just want to leave you with, we're trying to develop capacities and methodologies. We've created templates that any of these entities can use and modify, but we also set some ground rules that for you to benefit, because they are getting directly paid and compensated and contracted, we're requiring 4 activities. Actually, it was 5. One was a training, both on our tool and this other infrastructure field kit tool. We're requiring 4 in-person activities, 3 of which are in the field data collection at 3 different locations across your community. And then one of your activities must be a community workshop. And so far, we still have 3 community workshops to go. We had one in the week of celebrating Earth Day, and we'll have to see. We don't yet know what these kinds of partnerships can bring. We don't know the kind of inputs towards any specific project or potential investment there may be. But fortunately, it wasn't our money, so we're testing and experimenting with the state grant. But we hope to continue to advocate, because even though we haven't yet completed and the outcomes aren't there, it has been monumentally encouraging and filling to develop these kinds of relationships, because at the end of the day, it's all about people and relationships to embark on any of these challenging issues moving forward. So here you go. Here are those nonprofits, the IJLA, Infrastructure Justice for LA organizations. You can see the local on-the-ground community-based organizations that they are working with. 2 of these communities are unincorporated LA County, so they are not cities. 2 of these communities are actually in 2 different cities. The unincorporated areas include East Los Angeles and West Whittier. Paramount is a city itself, and notwithstanding its name, Panorama City is a neighborhood of Los Angeles City. And lastly, I just want to leave again, because I'm the one that chose the title, Moving from Maps to People. So let's leave it with some images of the actual people that are doing this work. Here are some images from the community workshop that we did with Climate Resolve and Inner City Struggle. That's the local community organization. There was some load or analog materials, as you can see, the people around the table. There were some digital materials, as you can see, some of the younger individuals just working on their phones, and then they can see a map being populated directly above. On the far right-hand side, you can see community group share out. We often don't afford enough time for the actual discussion after activities, so that was really important. And the last thing that I'll say that's not really captured here is that I think for environmental justice and climate justice work, we need a lot more grilling and street vendors. There was one at this event, and we need a lot more DJs to make this fun and engaging, because this is I don't know who said it yesterday, but the work is somewhat despairing, but we have to remind ourselves that it's okay to live. It's okay to be truthful and honest around the challenges. But if we're not doing this work together in an engaging and interesting setting, the work will be that much harder and difficult. Thank you.
Fantastic, Matt. Thank you so much. That was an incredible presentation and with so many details to it. And I have about 300 notes of things that I'd love to learn more about and would love for people to talk about in the Q&A section. And Matt, I think I correct in your description of the mega LA, perhaps it's also the county or city or the city in its surroundings with the highest concentration of Spanish-speaking people outside Mexico City. Isn't that the case as well? So an incredibly beautiful and diverse place. And so glad to see that community work is being part of the mega projects that you are leading. Now we move on to have our panelists. And we have the first panelist, Mark Buntaine, and he's going to tell us about other aspects, particularly in perhaps other cities. And Matt, you will have about 7 minutes to do your presentation.
Great, so thank you. And it was really inspiring to hear from Noga and Matt about the great work that's being done to address various types of hazards. Because when I think of climate justice around hazards, it's really about whose risks are being addressed. And it's really exciting to see the tools being developed to address risks equitably. I'm here to provide a bit of a backdrop of what happens if you don't do the good work that we've heard Noga and Matt talk about today. And what is the setting that we see across the United States, just to set the stage for how important this work is. One of the things that I think is really exciting to bring together folks from Los Angeles and Tel Aviv is this is an opportunity to lead the way. There are many efforts being talked about here that local governments around the country and around the world just don't have the capacity to undertake. And so there's a real sense that we can push out some of the tools and some of the approaches that are being developed here to other places. This is a flood that happened in Asheville, North Carolina in last year and illustrates one of the largest risks across the United States. So I'm going to talk nationwide to local governments. Floods cause tens of billions of dollars of damage each year across the United States. And what I'm interested in is what are the risks that are being addressed, and specifically whose risks are being addressed in the space of climate adaptation. And this is actually really hard to figure out at scale. If you look across the United States, you have tens of thousands of incorporated governments. And they all do different things to address different risks. So it's hard to form a comprehensive comparative analysis, for example, of what you might do related to flooding. What you might do related to flooding is going to look very different in very different spaces. And so it's hard to know whose risks are being addressed. What we have done to try to figure that out is look at planning efforts of every local government across the United States since 2000. And we specifically look at all of the local governments that have at least 2 census tracts, so about 15,000 people or more. And we look at whether or not those local governments have created hazard mitigation plans to access federal funds to address various types of flood and other hazards. And what we find is there is huge variation in whether local governments are being active in trying to address the risks that people face related to climate. What this means is that local governments are leaving huge amounts of federal funding on the table. When we look at why these hazard mitigation plans are important in the first place, it's because they provide access to federal funds for local governments to address risks through various types of projects that I illustrated in a previous slide. Matt, just as an aside, mentioned that under the current administration, some of these granting windows have been zeroed out. So we're facing sort of a bleak future and thinking about how local governments adapt to climate risk to begin with. But in this graph is just, if you have one of these hazard mitigation plans, how much money are you getting each year from the federal government to address your hazards? And it's factors of 5 to 10 higher than if you don't have hazard mitigation plans. What we're interested in is who is actually going after these kinds of funds and doing this planning, and whose risks are being addressed within the United States. And what we do is we look across every single local government in the United States. We break every local government down by census tract, and we figure out where are there high flood risks in each of those local government jurisdictions using very recent flood models. In particular, a high flood risk means that the average building in a jurisdiction will be inundated by at least an inch of water every 30 years. That's what you're going to see outlined in blue here. In green is whether you're in the top income quartile of your state. In gray is if you're in the bottom income quartile in your state. We do this across thousands of jurisdictions. And then we ask, which of these jurisdictions actually go out and plan for climate hazards? What is the characteristics of jurisdictions that take proactive action to address these hazards? It's worth saying that many of these jurisdictions don't have the resources of Tel Aviv or Los Angeles. Many of them don't have professionalized climate or sustainability offices. And so that's where I think there's opportunities to lead the way. What do we find? If you look across thousands of jurisdictions and you basically drop in different types of census tracts that face high flood risks, and you look at their probability of adopting hazard mitigation plans and going after this federal funding, if for every majority white census tract that you add to a jurisdiction that faces a high flood risk, their probability of adopting a hazard mitigation plan goes up by 10%. For every high income census tract that exists in a jurisdiction, their probability of adopting a hazard mitigation plan goes up by about the same amount. If you have people who are affluent and majority white who face high flood risks, local governments plan for hazards. The same is not true when we talk about minority communities and those that are low income. So if you look across the United States and our thousands of jurisdictions over the last 20 years, the jurisdictions where risks are concentrated in low income and minority communities are not going after federal funds to address risk. They're not planning for these risks. So when we talk about climate justice and whose risks are being addressed, it is critically important that we develop the tools and procedures like we've heard about, because this is what happens if you don't have those decision support tools. The backdrop is it's the affluent and the predominantly white areas that face high risk in the United States that are getting local governments to act. And that is an instance of climate injustice. And so what I would leave you all with is it's really important to learn from some of these larger efforts in places like Tel Aviv or Los Angeles. And my hope, my sincere hope, is that we will see these kinds of efforts become more accessible to the many, many local governments that are out there that are not able to have a full-time person who's thinking about sustainability or climate hazards in their office. Many of these local governments have a handful of staffers, and none of them are thinking about these issues full-time. And so one of the things that I hope will come out of this is that we'll see some of the great tools be developed for wider use, because the backdrop, if that does not happen, is fairly bleak. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Mark. What an amazing and painful message, actually, that if we were to do a Gini coefficient of the asymmetry in vulnerability, that would be a very high number, unfortunately, but we need to pay attention to those discrepancies. Our last panelist today is Meital Peleg-Mizrachi, and we're going to hear about the transition and green jobs and vulnerable communities in Israel. Please, thank you.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. So, yeah. My name is Meital. I'm a postdoctoral fellow at the Department of Economics at Yale University. And today I'm going to be talking about climate justice and protecting vulnerable population through the lens of just transition and green employment. And this is a topic I've been engaged with more in practice than in academia, particularly during my time as Director of Green Employment and Just Transition in Life and Environment, and with my work at the Presidential Climate Forum. So, as we all know, addressing the climate crisis and preventing its escalation require fundamental changes in our economic activity. Countries all across the world, including Israel, of course, will require to transition to a low carbon economy. But this transition mean in practice that while some industries gonna contract or disappear, other industries gonna evolve and extend, requiring from workers new skills that they didn't need before. Now, this transition is a sort of a double-edged sword. While in the long and even medium term, it has a substantial potential for economic growth. In the short term, it means that this transition to a low carbon economy gonna disproportionately affected workers from vulnerable population, especially from polluting industries. It's not gonna be easy. Many workers gonna be affected by that. And those are workers that already coming from a lower socioeconomic background and a disadvantaged background. So who are those vulnerable population? From a global perspective, we're talking about low-income communities, indigenous people, which if you want to think about it in the Israeli context, you can think about the Bedouins in the Negev. Women who are already suffering from social and economic inequalities, and informal workers that lack the legal protection that they need to have. But in the Israeli context, we're talking about peripheral communities that have limited job opportunities in the regions where they live. We're talking about minority populations such as ultra-Orthodox communities and Arabs, of course. And we're talking about low-income households that struggle with digital poverty. And it's important to understand about the peripheral communities, whether it's social periphery or geographic periphery, that those people are exposed to double exposure. They're at risk of losing their job, but at the same time, they usually live nearby environmental hazards. Mean that many times they need to choose between their livelihood or their health, and that's not an easy choice. So obviously, in order to deal with it, we need to have just transition and green jobs. In a nutshell, what does it mean? Because I know you all know what it means, but still, when we're talking about just transition, we're talking about a set of principle, process, and practice that aim to ensure that no people, workers, places, sectors, countries, or regions are left behind in this transition to a low carbon economy. And when we're talking about green jobs, we're talking about jobs that have direct and positive impact, whether it's about the environment or about society, under the paradigm of sustainability, of course. So in order to develop that, and to promote just transition in Israel, we developed a roadmap for just transition and green employment. And it was a really long process of more than 2 years that I had the privilege to lead in collaboration with the environmental movement, civil society, and the Ministry of Environmental Protection. And unfortunately, I don't have the time to go through the entire process, but you can scan the QR code and read a very comprehensive report. And I apologize for my head, it's mainly in Hebrew, but we do have executive summary in English, so you can read it. In this roadmap, we had 3 main pillars. The first one was about green entry into the workforce, creating accessible pathways for young and early career workers entering entering into green sectors. The second pillar was about supporting existing workers in green employment, workers that are already contributing either to environment or to society, such as public transportation drivers and education worker. And the third pillar was fair retraining for a low carbon economy. In order to test it and make sure that we can do this, that roadmap for green employment, we had a successful collaboration with Tel-Aviv-Yafo municipality. And it was a partnership with Tel-Aviv-Yafo municipality, local employers, and an academic institution, especially the academic Tel-Aviv-Yafo. We had two key initiatives. One was a training for a solar installation for a young Arab in Jaffa. And the other one was a green rehabilitation for a program for survivors of prostitution in Tel Aviv. So we had one program in Jaffa and the other one was in Tel Aviv. And the two of them was training programs for green employment to test our roadmap and make sure that we can do it. And we could and we did. Obviously, it had a great impact, not only for the people who participate in those programs, but also for their communities. And I'm not saying it was perfect. It wasn't perfect by all means, and it wasn't easy. We had a bunch of problems, to be honest. But we did manage to do it, and above all, we did manage to demonstrate that we can have those kind of collaborations and that we can create green jobs within the municipality of Tel Aviv-Yafo, which was the most important thing about it. And again, it had a great impact for the people who participate in those programs. So coming to my final slide, what did we learn from that and how do we do successful just transition or successful collaboration? Again, we need to have three pillars. The first one is structural condition. We want to have policy alignment with climate, labor, and social policy. Make sure that all of those frameworks are aligned with each other. And we want to have economic diversification. Make sure that we have a broad range of different sectors to reduce our dependency on carbon-intensive industry. The second pillar is about supporting employment transition, making sure that we're developing training that align with the future need of the job market and not with the current one, and providing social protection in this transition phase. Whether it's unemployment benefit or healthcare coverage, we want to support it and provide it during the process. And last but not least, we want to have equal participation. We want to have all stakeholders engaged in this process, whether those are workers, employers, local authorities, or civil society organization, and of course, community. As far as others are concerned, if you perceive yourself as a stakeholder, you are a stakeholder, and you're welcome to the table to have this conversation. And above all, we want to have a successful collaboration with a local government, which in Israel mean a municipality. Why? Because municipalities has the ability to identify the vulnerable population under their authority better than any other government, and definitely better than the national government. They know their communities, they know who are the vulnerable population, but at the same time, it's in their best interest to have those kind of collaboration. It's good for the economy to develop green jobs within the municipality inside of Tel Aviv. And it's also good for the community. So forgive me for the cliche, but it is a win-win-win kind of situation. And again, I'm not saying it's going to be easy, but we can do it as we demonstrate before. So with that note, thank you for listening.
Can I invite you to please take the stage and stay with us, please? So, my friends, in the interest of time, and I know that we're running a little bit late, we might invade a couple of minutes of the break, but what I would like to suggest for you all is that we go directly to comments and questions to the panelists, to the speakers and the panelists. So please, there's microphones around, I hope. Yeah, there's microphones up there. So if that's okay with you, we'll take questions and comments from the audience.
May I take up the invitation for all stakeholders to come to the table? Thank you, Dr. Mizrachi. I come to you as a climate concerned person, as a mother, as a staff member here at Stanford. And I want to return us to the conversation that began the opening session yesterday. To be honest, I've struggled with what to say and whether to say anything at all in the hours that I've attended this conference. I would like to name the thing that hasn't been said. I'd like to bring into language, if only for the 2 minutes I have at this floor and this mic, the words Palestine, Palestinians, and Gaza. I've been tallying literally the number of times the word Gaza has appeared so far at this conference. I think I'm at 6, not counting questions from people yesterday. And I've heard the word Palestinian, I think twice, and the word Palestine not once. But I've heard equity, vulnerable, disadvantaged, underserved, coalition, community, resilient, highest impacted, social justice, climate justice, environmental justice, many, many times. I feel like for every panel, every speaker that has taken place today and yesterday, there was a shadow parallel panel taking place in some alternate universe where people described what I recognize as happening, where the importance of planting trees takes place alongside the destruction of almost all of Gaza's orchards and farms, where afforestation is also sometimes a strategy of deliberate displacement, as in the West Bank, where water sustainability acknowledges the 247 average liters per day per person for Israeli citizens and the 2 to 9 liters per day for Gazans, where water infrastructure includes the destruction of 80% of the water treatment plants in Gaza. I could go on, but I'm pretty sure
But we're not going to let you go on and on. No, I'm sorry, ma'am. This is a question and answer period. I appreciate. So ask your question and they'll be answered. Thank you.
That was 200 words. 200 words. And my next sentence was, I think that's 200 words more.
Please give your question. Okay.
What obdurate moral infrastructures, to cite the one speech yesterday that I really appreciated so much by Dr. Efron. What obdurate moral infrastructures have you had to construct to make possible a demarcation between climate justice and real justice and environmental justice? To paraphrase your own words, Dr. Tal, climate is no excuse for neglecting justice.
As I said yesterday in the opening of the conference for those who weren't here, I think that just about everybody at this conference who spoke is as concerned and aware of what's going on. We didn't mention hostages either. There's a conflict that's raging. It's a very complicated war. It is not the subject of this gathering. It would be irresponsible, in my mind, for the environmental community, Israelis, Palestinian Arabs, whatever you want to call them, to not face their global responsibilities, while at the same time, many of us are very active in trying to promote a more just resolution of our differences with the Palestinian people. I'm going to leave it at that. Can we have a question about the panel on environmental justice, please?
Question, please. Hopefully questions relatively concrete.
Thank you so much. I'll keep this brief. My name is Ray. I'm joining today as a local Jewish faith leader with family in Israel, as someone who's devoted my life's work to climate science and human rights, and also as a recent graduate of a D-School course here at Stanford, which taught us that design for social and ecological impact must center empathy for those involved and most at risk. I'm so grateful to Stanford for that opportunity to take that course. Given these identities, I feel morally compelled to respectfully again name the elephant in the room.
Can you ask a question, please, ma'am? Please, listen, ma'am. Well, please ask the question now. It's not a time for speeches. Thank you.
Thank you. When you speak about about Tel-Aviv and ignore the scorched earth just 40-some miles to the south, can you speak to what's happening there and how this ecological destruction sees no borders? Can you speak to how you square your understanding of climate justice with U.S. weapons-backed Israeli bombardment of Gaza?
I think we're going to accept that question. Thank you for it, and have the next question have something relevant to the panel. Thank you.
Yeah. Here's a microphone.
I really appreciate this conference. I think it's really interesting information. I especially appreciate hearing about LA, so close, and yet I'm not very familiar with it. And I also appreciate hearing about emissions. A study came out last year demonstrating that in the first 120 days of the current war in Gaza, between 420 and 650,000 tons of carbon dioxide equivalents were released. This was due to massive military firepower, including the dropping of 500 2,000
Can we have
pound bombs.
a question, please, ma'am?
Yes,
We're
I
going to
have a
have to stop
question.
you.
In the
Please.
first month alone, my question is, in terms of emissions, now I've lost my train of thought and I forgot my question, but here it is. In terms of education, I am very curious for each of the panelists exactly what is being done to educate both our leaders and the populace with these very important links between these astronomical emissions in this massive US-funded Israeli decimation of Gaza, the resultant acceleration.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Ethan McMahon. We have another question coming, ma'am. You've talked about it. Thank you very much for your question. Thank you. Ethan, would you like to ask a question, please? Go right ahead. Go ahead, Ethan.
Taking a moment of silence. Yes, thanks for your talks about the climate planning and so on, and environmental justice planning. And I'm wondering how we can actually get to the action. You know, we talked about lots of plans, organizations, structures, outreach to people to hear their concerns, outreach to people to tell them of their risks. And how do we get the money and the ability to act and actually take the action? Otherwise, we will be in the third of Mr. Holdren's options of suffering. So how do we get to that?
Sure. It starts with the conversations and the planning. And without, one thing that I didn't share was within this direct nonprofit partnership work, we're also interviewing staff and representatives either at the county level or the city level. One, to let them know that this work is ongoing and these are great leaders right in their communities, that they should become aware of them and get connected with them, and also to prepare them to be project proponents and advocates for the ideas that are surfacing, to help them understand the direct connections between the impacts to their constituents, the opportunities either to align existing funding or to explore other funding opportunities. And it's not always just physical investments. There are other programmatic or more service-based opportunities that we can work with people, whether it's more education, more direct engagement, or supporting them to continue to enhance their ability to be community leaders because they're interested, they're immediately and more intimately directly connected with the individuals that are impacted, and help bridge sort of the paternalistic top-down concepts of support with the advocacy support, and hopefully meet in the middle to continue to work on it together.
Thank you. May I ask the next people who want to ask questions to please use the time of the break, which we're going to go into. And I'm so sorry, but can you please keep your questions for the break, because we need to finish this panel now. What I would like to close by is a very quick note about the fact that in your conversations, you talked also about biodiversity within cities. And I think that's such an important component. The other thing that I want to emphasize is how wonderful it was for you guys to involve the communities actually, because I don't think that we can aspire to sustainability, to addressing the challenges of climate injustice and so on, without paying attention to the communities. If you have any comments about that to wrap up, that would be wonderful. And then we'll go for coffee or tequila or something like that.
So I'll just add one more thing. I think it's a lot about collaboration between universities and academic institutions to the actual field. With this project that I presented, it had nothing to do with my PhD, but still it was extremely important. And I can share with you that in order to make it happen, basically, I've drawn a lot of my my studies and my knowledge from my studies, but at the same time, it was about collaboration with that I former headed as a former social worker at the Tel-Aviv Yafo municipality, and with businesses that I used to work with when I worked at the fashion industry as the employers, the on-the-job training providers. So I think if you'll take just one thing from that panel, I would say collaboration between the field and the academia. We don't want to have those two things separated.
Thank you. Last words from any one of you? That's it. Well, thank you so much for your participation in this panel. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We'll be reconvening at 11:15. The conference room will once again be divided in two. On the east side will be a discussion about the role of civil society on NGOs. And on the west side, we'll have a panel on technology and climate resilience and second be involved. We'll try to start promptly, and thank you very much. Enjoy the break.